Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I'm really thrilled to have one of my favorite writers here, Mia Sosa. And I have many questions for her. And this is just going to be a quick fire Q&A, and I hope you have lots of questions too. So before we get started, just want to say a couple things. One is, I'd love to thank the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. And Mia agreed to allow us to partner with some other libraries in the area. And so I, of course, welcome our patrons from Ashland, but also the patrons from Watertown, Needham, Marlborough, Maynard, Beverly, Northampton, Belmont, and Tewksbury. So glad you're here, and hopefully, like I said, you'll have a great time with us. You can buy signed books from Mia from Bank Square Books. I will put that link in the chat. So for the questions, I'm going to ask you to put your questions in the Q&A. There's a button down at the bottom of your Zoom that says Q&A. Put your questions there, and if you want to chat with each other, feel free to do that in the chat. I will be paying attention to that as well. So Mia, thank you so much for doing this. I know when I reached out to you and you responded pretty quickly, and I kind of had like this squee moment. So
my pleasure.
Oh, thank you. So why don't you tell everybody about yourself and why I think you're so awesome, and a little bit about your most recent book.
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for being here. My name is Mia Sosa, and I write funny, flirty, and what I call moderately dirty contemporary romances and rom-coms. I have been writing romance since 2015. So I am a baby romance author, or at least that's what I say. And my latest book is The Wedding Crasher, and that is a follow-up to my 2020 release, The Worst Best Man. And in The Wedding Crasher, essentially what I call the log line is a love-averse lawyer ends up fake dating the woman who stopped his wedding.
I love that trope.
I can't get enough of fake dating. It is one of the best tropes, in my opinion, in my humble opinion. So I had a lot of fun with this book.
Mm-hmm. So let's maybe start at the beginning. Did you always know you were going to be a writer?
I didn't.
Oh.
And there's so many people, whenever other writers talk about how they got to where they are, and there's often this discussion of knowing very early on that they wanted to be writers and writing a lot when they were young. And I did write a lot, but it was sort of in the kind of social commentary field. And even when I was in high school, it was poetry. And so it was never anything related to romance. And I kind of dabbled. And when I started to think, well, what am I going to do when I grow up? The thing that I enjoyed was talking to people, arguing with people, sharing my thoughts, but also advocating for people. And so it was very easy for me to decide that what I wanted to do was become a lawyer, which is what I did. So went to college and then directly went to law school, and then practiced in Philadelphia and then in Washington, D.C., and ended up finding what really was my passion at the time, First Amendment and media laws. So representing kind of broadcasters and newspapers. So when a reporter wanted to write a story about the government, for example, then I was the person who would go into court and basically argue to a judge that the reporter was entitled to the information that the government was withholding. So it was a lot of fun. But it was a lot of work. And I was raising my kids along with my husband. And we kind of did this reverse career slowdown. So when I was on my rise, he wasn't. And then when he was on his rise, I decided that I wouldn't be, so that we would always have somebody available to our children and at all of the events. I couldn't fathom the idea that, there would be an event and one of us wouldn't be there. And so I took a step back from practice. And when I did, I thought, oh, I'm just going to relax. I'm just going to go work out. And that went by the wayside, I think within maybe 6 months. And within 6 months, I was kind of like, okay, what's next? And I was a big romance reader, always had been, even when I was practicing, even when I was in law school. And I would dabble in kind of writing that first chapter of a book, never really completed anything. And then when I was no longer practicing, I thought, well, why not actually try and finish a book?
Mm.
Uh, and so that's what I did. I actually finished a book and didn't sell that book, but sold the next one that I wrote. And that was the beginning of my romance career.
So given that history, why romance of all the genres?
I think romance because writing it gives me what I gained from reading it, which is this sense of hope, this sense that no matter what happens, no matter whatever trials and tribulations happen during the story, I know at the end of the day that there is going to be a happily ever after, and that it's going to end on a high note. And that is something that I look to throughout my life. As I mentioned, I read romance while I was in law school, which was a very stressful
Oh,
time.
you did not mention that. So that's
Oh, I thought I
fascinating.
did. Okay, right. So I read romance while I was in law school. I read romance while I was practicing. And so those moments that were very stressful in my life, I often went back to romance because it gave me just this sense of calm, this sense of comfort. And so when I thought about, well, what would I write and what would I enjoy and what would I be passionate about, it became very clear that romance, it just made total sense. It was, for what most people would say a no-brainer for me.
Mhm. Now, did you read romance when you started in college, or did you read it before? Did you pick it up in college
Oh,
because it was stressful?
no, I read romance when I was probably starting around 13, 14 years old.
Mm.
And I started reading romance at the library. And I remember this. I remember when I was growing up, I grew up in East Harlem in New York, and I traveled and I took the train to school. And I had to pass the library on the way home. And I would stop in, and at first it was to do homework there. I would do homework and then continue on. And I don't remember the precise moment when this happened, but I know that when I was at the library, I would look at books and picked up a romance book, and then the rest was history. I
Mhm.
kept on reading them. And I would always read them there quickly, never actually having to take them out. And then I would go home. And so it just became this thing that I did. And I enjoyed so much. It was kind of a window into other worlds, things that I had never been exposed to. And I just kind of soaked it up, and I never stopped once I started.
So I'm going to do a little crowdsourcing here to see if people remember the first romance they read. Put it in the chat if you remember. I remember mine very distinctly. I was 16. It was called Cassandra. It was the worst book ever created, but I loved it so much. So do you remember?
I don't.
You
I do
don't.
not. And I have really, really tried to remember what the first romance was, and I cannot for the life of me. And I am pretty sure that it was likely a Harlequin. I can still in my mind picture the covers. But what that first book was, I don't remember.
Okay, that's fine. So Anissa remembers
know.
hers as a Nicholas Sparks. I'm like, okay. Yeah, it's for people like we read so much. Oh, Mrs. Mike, of course, such a good one. Anyways, so many of us do remember because it was a part, as you say, part of the start of
Right.
that journey.
Yeah.
So did you read other genres as well, or do you read other genres as well?
I'm not a genre reader, so which is really interesting, because I find for a lot of my friends, they read romance and mystery and thrillers, and I am very much, when it comes to genre, a romance reader. And then I like to read, just literary fiction, and I also like to read memoirs or listen to memoirs.
Mhm.
So one of the ones that I have listened to and loved was Trevor Noah's memoir. And so that is kind of where I go when I'm not reading romance. My husband's a big action and thriller fan, but I've just never been able to get into it.
Mhm. Well, just like I think it, we should all be allowed to read romance. I think we should be allowed to read whatever we want.
Right.
Right.
Oh, yeah, you'll get no argument from me.
I'm pretty sure I won't get argument from any romance reader. Um,
Right.
Lisa asks, and I completely agree with this question. Why do so many lawyers become authors? Is the law that soul crushing?
So this is a question I often get, and I cannot say that I know the answer to this. The way that I think about it is that there is sort of the cynical answer, and then there is kind of like a little bit of a logical answer. And the logical answer is that for a lot of lawyers, particularly litigators, you write a lot. Such that making the leap from writing briefs, which is what I did, to writing a book is not a huge leap. You can fathom sort of sitting down and in a couple of weeks writing 80,000 words, because sometimes that is what you had to do when you were working on, very, very long briefs, particularly briefs that were at the appellate level, which is also what I did. So, so there's that kind of logical side. And then, yes, there is that cynical side that says these people have had like the life force sucked out of them, and so it makes sense that romance would be kind of like this beacon of hope for them. It was for me, frankly. And there were times, certainly in the practice of law, where I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? Like, some of these people are awful. And when I found myself kind of immersed in a romance book, I got away from all of that. So there might be a little bit of that too. But I do think it's a combination of things. And at least for the litigators that I know, I think it's that they spend so much time kind of presenting ideas that then presenting fictional ideas is something that for some people comes naturally to them.
Mhm. And I think that there's something to be said for romance writers come from all different places.
Yeah,
Right. So like, you were a lawyer, there's people that are, like Eloisa James is a professor, like
absolutely.
Vanessa Riley was a technology magnate. I've been
Yes,
told,
yes.
things like that. So like,
There are tons of careers within romance, and so it's always really interesting. But yes, the thing that I have heard over and over again is, wow, there are a lot of lawyers.
right. I mean, of course, we all think of Courtney Milan.
Yes,
When you
yes.
think about it. So what was your entry into publishing like? You said you didn't sell your first book, but then you
Mhm.
did sell your second book. Um,
Yes.
there was something about the second book that you think was more appealing?
I think that well, the first book, honestly, like I didn't know what I was doing with the first book. I wrote a book and I used a couple of guides, but I don't know that it had like a real plot. I don't think I really thought about like conflict. What are my characters' motivations? What's going to be their development over the course of the story? So that book sits on my desktop and I pull from it every once in a while. At this point, that book is in my other stories. It's just little pieces that I can't let go of.
Mhm.
But my second book was a book that I wrote as part of the Romance Writers of America unpublished writers contest.
Mm.
And I think I went through that process and I was a finalist in contemporary romance for that book. And I think that got me the attention of my publisher, and then they sort of scooped it up before anybody else did.
Mhm. It seems to me like you never looked back.
Yeah. I mean, once I did that, I was off to the races. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed working with an editor and going through the process of making a book stronger. And I think that's the other thing, is that I was never afraid of the collaborative process. I was never upset. Well, no, there were times where I was kind of like, wow, those are a lot of comments, but I never thought, this isn't something that I can't fix so that I can make this book the best that it can be. And it's because I had been through that collaborative process. There was no brief when I was working as a lawyer that I wrote and nobody else ever touched. It was a process. We would exchange drafts, and people would take pieces, and we'd figure out how to make an argument stronger, how to rely on different cases. And so, going through that process gave me kind of a more creative way to do something that I had already done. There was a lot to learn. It's, writing romance is very different from brief writing, and there was a lot for me to unlearn because writing briefs is just so very I'm trying to think of what the right word is, but it requires you to follow a formula, but the formula is not this sort of, here's what a brief looks like. It's kind of, what does this judge expect to see in this particular brief? And your writing is then kind of geared towards what that judge expects. And for me, what I had to learn as a romance writer is to create a voice. Like, you don't want a voice in brief writing. It's
Mhm.
not you that comes through, it's your client's arguments that need to come through. But as a romance writer, one of the things that is really important to your success is having a voice, having something that sets you apart from your peers, something that people look forward to, something that people expect, and that make them want to pick up your next book. So I had to learn all of that. I had to figure out what my voice was. I had to figure out where I felt comfortable, figure out things like point of view and whether I was going to write in third person or first. I very much write in first person present, but I've written other books in third person past. And so those are the things that you kind of have to figure out over the course of your career and figure out where you're comfortable. And it's not static. It can change depending on kind of where you are in your career, or what kind of book you're writing.
Mhm.
So,
Great.
lot to learn, but it was fun, and it still is fun because I'm still learning.
Well, that sounds great, because it does sound like a completely different animal, although you learn like
Yes.
the basics, in law as a lawyer. But So one of the things you had said sort of a little while ago was that you were also interested in activism, and I wonder if you feel like writing romance is in some ways part of that sense of wanting to be an activist.
Yeah. Um, I think there is, it's not so much that being a romance author um, kind of allows me to be that activist, but I think that my worldview and my mindset kind of permeates my writing such that I do think that there are ways that I can inform people. I can make them think about things that perhaps they've never thought about. I can um, give readers an opportunity to empathize with people who may not look like them, people who have different experiences from them. So all of that I view as opportunities. And when I write, there is almost never a moment where I'm not thinking about kind of what I want the world to look like, and what I'd love people to be like, including sort of imagining how men treat women, and imagining those dynamics, and navigating them, and wanting to show healthy relationships, relationships that aren't based on toxicity, relationships in which people communicate. All of that is not activism in the traditional sense, but it is sort of doing the work, I think, of uh, more than writing a fun story,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Which you do, also. But I
Thanks.
think I think that's an interesting concept of what I think of as activism, because I hadn't really thought through the fact that you're also talking about having healthy relationships. What does that look
Yeah.
like between two people to be respectful and communicate and have good communication as
Mhm.
well? I'm gonna have to think about that. But the thing about your books that I really love, and we can dig into the books at this point, is that they are really joyful, and there isn't any sense of, oh, I have to get a message across. It's just
Right,
people living their lives, doing their thing, finding love and figuring it out. So
right.
is that sort of intentional on your part, or is it sort of a byproduct of wanting it to write a rom-com as opposed to like a memoir, as you were talking about, or a
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is very intentional. What I want to do is I want to put on the page these positive and fun relationships, and all of my books feature people of color. And I think it's so important to um, be able to show those joyful experiences, and share them with people, and make them sort of the default. um
Mhm.
and I think a lot of times, I too, sometimes I expect that I'm going to read a story, and perhaps experience some trauma, and then sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, and I'm like, oh, this is so great, this was just joyful, and that's what we need. um I definitely think that the pandemic affected my view of what I wanted to put on the page as well. I received so many messages from readers who said that The Worst Best Man, which was the book that came out in 2020, was really a lifeline for them. That people who said they, nurses who were in the hospital and seeing terrible things, and folks who were stuck at home and couldn't go anywhere and feeling very isolated, who reached out and said, your book brought me so much joy. And I had
Amazing.
not until then really thought about how much romance affects readers positively, and not in a frivolous way, in a way that is that really affects readers day to day. Whether it's, I've got my so-called guilty pleasure, which I don't subscribe to, but people do. And if that's it and it's bringing you joy, it makes a difference. It really does. It makes a difference. And when you can give people an escape for even a couple of hours a day, or in some cases, I would get messages where people would in real time tell me, like, I've read it over the course of this week. Just give them that joy. It really affected me. I know it really affected many of my counterparts who are doing the work as well and are bringing joy to so many. And so I think because of that experience, I just want to do more and more. I just want to keep on giving folks the opportunity to kind of set aside whatever is going on, whether it's the toddler who's in the living room and asking what's for dinner, or the boss who's pissing you off, that you have the opportunity to sort of set everything aside and spend a couple of hours with one of my books and hopefully laugh, and smile, and think about something, or get exposed to a food you've never heard of, or a song that you've never heard. That in my mind, when I think about folks doing that and reading my books, that brings me a lot of joy and a lot of fulfillment. It refills my well when folks reach out to me and they say, I just read your book and it was fantastic, and thank you so much. It was the perfect way to spend my vacation. I mean, what more can I want? It's a lovely feeling to be able to do what I do. And
Are you
so
like done?
no, never, because it's frightening, and it's scary, because you're putting yourself on the page, and you're opening yourself up to criticism and all of that. But it all becomes worth it when you get that kind of message, and you sort of say, okay, well, I may not be for everybody, and I am fully comfortable with that, because there are so many authors that everyone could be reading. And so I'm like, no problem. You don't like my stuff. That's okay. Go find the author that you do love. But there are readers who come to my work and really enjoy it. And for those folks, I just want to keep on giving them what I have been giving them.
Mhm. And did you find, so obviously in the last, I would say 10 years, there's been a rise of, really the publishers looking for more diverse voices to show readers themselves on the page. Do you think that that were your readers telling you that during the pandemic, that they were reading more of that because they were seeing more of themselves on the pages, or was it just pure like escapism?
I think it was a combination of things. There were some folks who were reading my books and it was the pure escapism. It was joy. It was, I just laughed so much, and oh my gosh, I learned about Brazilian culture, or an aspect of Brazilian culture that I never knew about, and that's fantastic. So there were, the books bring different things to different readers, and it depends on how you come to the book as well. And then there were folks who sent messages that said, specifically about Lena, the main character in The Worst Best Man, that was so relatable to me. Her experience and her describing kind of this wall that she puts up, this in order to protect herself, and how she had to navigate her life in the workforce in order to be perceived in a particular way that had meaning for a lot of people. There were a lot of people who that experience really resonated with them. And so, I think for some people it was, I'm seeing this experience and people talking about it, and it really has meaning to me. And then, oh my gosh, in addition to that, it's swoony and I'm laughing, and somehow all of that kind of comes together. So I think the answer is that there were readers who were getting different things from my books, but all of it I consider to be important.
Mhm. Absolutely. And do you think that writing humor is harder than writing not humor?
I think all writing is hard.
I
I
just
think
think like sometimes.
I just think it's not that it's any easier or harder what you write. I think that there are more opportunities when you're writing humor to not have a joke land, because um, humor is very personal. Humor is very specific. Humor is very subjective. And while all writing is subjective, humor has the opportunity to offend. Humor has the opportunity to make people cringe. Humor has the opportunity to be cast in a way that perhaps minimizes something that for somebody else shouldn't be minimized. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of missteps that can be made with humor. And so it's challenging, but I wouldn't say it's any more challenging than in any genre, sort of, trying to check the boxes of what's expected of that genre. There are always missteps. But with humor, there's definitely, I think, the opportunity to um, uh, really have people rally around, a scene that to them just is outright hilarious. And then another group of people will look at that and say, like, what the heck was that? And then you have to figure out, like, did I read that wrong, or are these folks not my readers? And so that's just part of the process. And I actually kind of think it's fun because I'm learning, and I am an inquisitive person, and I'm always interested in kind of questions of human nature and how people react to various stimuli. And so because of that, I'm kind of like, let me gather this information. I'm always trying to make people laugh. I'm never trying to offend anyone. But that doesn't mean that I always achieve that. But I try to learn from people's reaction to my work.
Mhm. I do find your books incredibly funny, and again, like you said, subjective and everything, but they're
Right.
not. The humor is so intelligent to me. Like it just doesn't. It never talks down to me. It never makes me seem like I'm, you know, um, offended, right? It's witty, exactly, Sonia. It's witty and it's clever and it's so I think it is hard because I've read so many I've read so many books that try to be humorous, and they really, for me, fall down because it's too many pratfalls. It's not, it's there's no thought behind it. So that's where I'm like kind of like thinking, like, do you have to really put a lot of thought into that things that you think are going to be funny?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I was thinking about this because I'd been approached about doing a workshop on any topic relating to romance. And I immediately thought, well, what about writing humor? And as I was just kind of brainstorming, within 5 minutes, I had like a full outline of all of the things that I immediately thought of, because it is something that is so thoughtful. Like when I'm writing romance, I am thinking about kind of various things. The kind of witty. Am I coming up with turns of phrases that people will remember? Is the banter such that it'll make people smile?
Mhm.
Um, uh, for the scenes that are kind of what I call like the rom-com movie scenes, so that you can visualize them. I sit there and I visualize kind of like, can I see this? And does it make sense? And then I even think about genre specific humor, kind of what are longtime readers of romance going to laugh about if I kind of do like a, kind of nod to something that maybe only those longtime readers would laugh about. So there's all of these things that I'm thinking about as I'm writing romance. And it definitely is a process. It's not about kind of I'll just create situational humor, because situational humor can also fall flat as well. It's the variation, it's the variety, it's kind of putting yourself in this world where funny things happen, and funny things happen means there are funny people, there are funny situations, there are nods to things that particular sets of readers would know that maybe others don't, and that's perfectly fine. I think about all of that as I'm trying to write a romance. But again, it makes it fun. It's a process, and there are and in addition to sort of thinking through the ways that I can put humor on the page, I'm also thinking about trying to be respectful of readers, and making sure that I am not um, uh, using humor in a way that puts a particular group or a particular activity in a light that suggests that it should be made fun of, if that makes sense.
No, I agree, because my next question was, or comment was, that I don't ever think your humor is mean in your books. It doesn't
That's yeah.
it doesn't depend on putting somebody else down in
Right.
order to be funny. And that's what I really appreciate, because that's intelligent humor to me. Like it's more thoughtful. It doesn't just depend on that. And I think you do that so beautifully.
Well, thank you. I mean, that is the goal. And I probably don't get it right 100% of the time, but it is the thing that I try to do 100% of the time.
It comes through. So let's talk about this moderately hot heat level. What does that mean? Like, is that sort of like somewhere between the closed door and bringing the barn animals? Like, what is that?
So I think it's, again, because it's moderately dirty. The reason why I think it's so funny is because it's all in the eye of the reader, right? Some people will say, goodness, she writes super, super, super hot stuff. And I mean, it's open door. Uh, and for another reader, they're like, this is very tame. And also, you made me wait until the 65% mark. And what the heck is that? So it's all sort of relative. And so the moderately dirty is just my kind of, again, the wink wink and a nod to what I know is a very real conversation about spice levels and kind of, what people expect in their books. I would never even attempt to kind of describe my books definitively. I just don't think there's any way to do that because everybody has a different take on it. And so unless there is some standard that eventually comes to be, I am just gonna sort of sit here and say, well, and I describe it as alternatively a little dirty. And it's because yes, there's sex on the page, but it is probably has fewer words than kind of what's over on the really, really hot side of the scale, but definitely has more words than the low end of the scale.
So, but that brings me back to what you had started talking about a little bit a while ago of healthy relationships
Mhm.
and the sex on the page, and
Yeah.
talking about how people should be that sex is okay for everybody, that
Mhm.
it's appropriate, it's can be talked about, and is part of the communication in the relationship.
Yeah. I think that, so for me, um, what I like to do in many of my stories is um, show that kind of interaction, the sexual interaction, in a positive way.
Mhm.
Um, and in a positive way, meaning um, uh, folks are communicating. In a situation, I write MF and with secondary characters that are LGBTQ. And so in all of those situations, what I'm trying to do is show, again, positive, non-toxic, consensual, but also fun, and kind of showing that uh, that interaction can be healthy and fun, and a person and a partner can ask for what they want, and that there's nothing wrong with that. Those are all of the things that I'm thinking about. I like when I write my sex scenes, I'm thinking about several things. Kind of, is it clear that these people want to be doing this? Is the power dynamic okay in the situation? And what are they learning about each other as a result of having sex, and how have they changed? And so thinking through all of that stuff, I think means what I am trying to do is show one aspect of a positive relationship, but then also reinforce that a positive relationship can include sex. Although in some of my books, I also say this, it doesn't have to.
Mhm. So you talked a little bit about what during and after, but what has to happen for you, for your characters before they ever get to sex? Because you said like sometimes, they don't get to it until about 65 or 60%
Right.
of the book. So what has to happen in their relationship for them to get to that point?
I wouldn't say that something has to happen, because I have had books in which they start with a one night stand,
Mhm.
um, and so there isn't that connection. It's more so the question is what needs to happen by the end of the book, because it may not follow sort of a straight line in terms of where their relationship goes and how that relationship navigates sex. But what I hope by the end of the book is that that when they are kind of in a sexual relationship at the end, that it is that the reader feels confident that these two people respect each other, and that they are really wanting the other to connect with them, and that connection is important to them, and that this is one manifestation of that connection, but not the end all be all.
Mhm.
So the so what I always think of is, what is that like, I think, what does that last scene look like? And I mean, what does that last sex scene look like? And it tends to be, more emotional. It is the time when I think the characters are kind of unmasked, and they are their true selves, because a lot of times, throughout the books, they're knuckleheads, and they're holding things back, or sometimes they're not revealing things about themselves. So when that final scene happens, it's sort of them at really being their true selves, and that isn't necessarily a perfect self, but it is a self that is ready to connect with the other person.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I love the progress of your characters though, because they don't have these super misunderstandings. They always have reasons for
Yeah.
why they're knuckleheads
Yeah.
necessarily, or and I love that because you kind of don't ever talk down to me. Like you treat your characters like they're, responsible adults. So again, is that intentional? Do you really, how do you outline your stories and characters so that they do end up being responsible?
Yeah, I mean, the guiding thing that I consider when I write my characters is, because my characters do things that would make you want to like knock your head on the desk, and I fully expect that that's going to be the case. The thing that guides me is the hope that I have created a character that at all times a reader believes is good at their core. So then that's why I think it's easy to sort of not have someone who's being mean, even when they're doing things that they know are going to hurt the other person. That there is a good reason. As a reader, you have been brought into a world in which the characters are not ready for that relationship, and so they do things that you know drive us batty. But the goal is to get them to the point where they figure it out. But the hope for me, and how I consider kind of what their backstory is going to be, what's the thing that's holding them back from truly being ready for love, all of that stuff I think about. But the core has to be good. Like, this
Mhm.
person at their core has to be good, because I want readers to feel comfortable with them, to feel like, okay, I can let down my guard as a reader and know, like, these are good folks. They're going to make bad decisions. They're going to make bad choices. There's no question about it, but they're not um, bad people.
Mhm.
And so I can feel comfortable going on this journey with them.
Mhm. But isn't that why we find that your book so hopeful? Because we are also that's what's relatable to us, because we're good people. I'm going to speak for myself. I'm a good
Yeah.
person, but I do stupid stuff sometimes,
Right.
and make poor decisions. So if you see it on the page, you're more likely to relate to that person or
No
that
question.
character.
No question. And then that's why I relate to my characters. And I think it makes it easier for me to write my characters, because I sit there and I go, you know what? I am not a mean person. I am not a terrible person. I think about this and I'm like, I don't do terrible things, but I don't always make the best choices. Right. And
Mhm.
so, I can totally relate. And those things have to do with my backstory. Those things have to do. And so, we all come to a relationship with a history. an upbringing, a relationship history that may affect kind of how you act. And so I think coming up with ways to show that on the page and to make it relatable to folks is the challenge, because we're writing romance, and so people know what the end is going to be, right? So the joy is in making an interesting premise, giving the characters a backstory that that readers can really grab onto and sort of say, how are they going to wrestle with these issues to get to the end, and then following them on that journey. So it's kind of the same thing that I think about for myself, and kind of like, how am I gonna deal with a particular situation? I have a friend, and that friend, we've kind of grown apart, and how am I going to deal with that? And I want to, reconnect. How do I do that? That's all of the stuff. It's very real. So like, how can you get stuff like that people are experiencing and kind of make it part of the characters' lives so that readers find it relatable? So those are the things that I think about as I'm trying to write.
It's awesome. And also I love that none of your characters are too stupid to live. I love it.
So far.
Male or female, they're all, yeah, so far. Thank you. I appreciate
So
that.
far.
So Sonia asks, do you see a third book in the Worst Best Man universe coming soon?
So I will say, I can't say no, never, but the current plan is not to continue and do a third book in that series. I know there are a lot of people who had hopes of a story with Brandon, a story with Yasleen. I had even for one moment anticipated doing a Brandon and Yasleen story. But I have figured out that what brings me joy about writing romance is creating the world. And so I am shifting my writing to standalones, so that I can create the world, and have people dip into that world and learn about the people within one book and then move on to the next. So we'll see. But I would not say like it's never going to happen. It's just not going to happen now.
All right. Well,
I know.
we'll
I
wait to
know.
see. I'm curious about the standalone thing, because I love that idea, because I feel like we've gotten so far away from it. We have all these series which I actually really love, but that just never end. And so having a standalone seems very, defiant right now.
I don't know that it's defiant. I think that there are certain romance authors who are in the standalone space, and Christina Lauren is a perfect example of that. And so I think it's been done. I think that publishers tend to encourage series because they want to create reader loyalty, and readers, once they find characters that they love, want to continue in those stories. And I totally understand that, and I get it. And I too tend to read, probably up until book 3 in a series, because I'm interested in characters, or there's a character that I saw in an earlier book and I absolutely have to get their story. So I totally get it. But I also am a big fan of standalones, because it doesn't require me to know everything or to remember everything about other characters. And so I'm hoping that freedom gives me the opportunity to come up with more and more interesting premises. I am very much the way that I write is to be drawn to a premise, and to want to make that premise work. That is what happened with The Worst Best Man. That is what happened with The Wedding Crasher. That is what happened with the next book that I am writing. It's very premise driven. And so I want to like run with it, create that world, and make whatever bonkers thing I've come up with work. And that lends itself to standalone novels.
Mhm. And readers are so loyal, not just to series, but to authors.
Right.
So I'll pretty much read anything you write, Mia. So
Thank
bring
you.
it.
That's the hope. I mean, that's the hope. But what I hope to communicate to folks is it's going to be more of the same, what you've come to love, in terms of my writing. I will be doing more of that. It's just going to be with different characters.
I'm okay with that. So, two last questions. One
Sure.
is, do you have a book that you would recommend for us to read?
So, I will tell you, okay, this is kind of cheating. Because I just finished a book. So this book should be on your radar. Which is that I just finished the arc of Tracy Livesey's book, The
Of
Duchess
course.
Effect. And friends, it is fantastic. So for those of you who don't know, Tracy Livesey wrote American Royalty. So this book is out. This book is coming out, I think, in July. So this is the follow-up book, and it continues the story of Danny and Jameson. Danny is an American rapper. Jameson is British royalty. And it is a fantastic story. And then this iteration is the kind of nitty gritty of their relationship and them navigating kind of being in this very public coupling that people are greedy to know about, and how they navigate all of the obstacles that arise as a result of that. So I highly recommend, if you haven't read American Royalty, reading that, but then also putting The Duchess Effect on your radar, because it's great. And as a duo, it's really great. So and that's the other thing. It's the kind of duology where if you read it back to back, like I really envy the people who will have that opportunity, who haven't read American Royalty and then will read them back to back, because it seems seamless.
Mhm. I will also read anything Tracy writes. So thank you for that. So last question is, any chance any of your books will become movies, TV shows, something?
There's always a chance. The Worst Best Man was optioned for film, and that process continues along. I will tell you that as soon as I know that something is actually happening, I will let readers know. But things in Hollywood move at a snail's pace, and that is even more so the case with the pandemic, and now with the potential for a writer's strike. So who knows what will happen? And the next book that I'm writing, or I'm actually in the process of editing now, is an Audible original. It's called The Starter X. And that book, in my mind, is sort of it is primed to be in film, and I would love to see it play out. So we'll see if that happens. I never know these things.
Well, so I kind of lied. Now I need to know about the Starter X.
Okay. Okay, so the Starter X is actually an Audible original. So it will start out in Audible, and then 6 months later will be released in digital and print. But it is I've described it as Hitch meets How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. It is a situation where a woman in college had sort of this side gig as a worst girlfriend. She essentially got hired by women and men to make the target's life miserable, in the hopes that the person who was paying her services would then sweep in and kind of save the day and become the next person that the target dated. And she obviously has grown up, has put that behind her, but her sister wants her to do it one last time. And she has a complicated relationship with her sister, and feels like there's penance to be done, and so therefore agrees to do this. And of course, the target this time is ultimately the male main character of the book, and the person she will fall in love with, which creates all kinds of complications. But the other issue is that he discovers the ruse, and so he knows what's going on. So she is trying to make him miserable. He is taking it and making her miserable, and there's a lot of sort of shenanigans that arise as a result of that. So another kind of fun rom-com that I think readers will enjoy.
Oh my gosh, I want to read it now. But when do you anticipate it to come out?
So that one's coming out in 2024. When in 2024, I do not know, because there's a whole process over at Audible, including the possibility of getting celebrity narrators. So we'll see. Maybe something happens, but you will see it in 2024. And then there'll be some more fun stuff coming soon.
Oh my gosh, so exciting. So thank you so much. This is amazing. Everything I expected it to be, and then some. So thank you everybody for being here and your questions. And I'll send out the recording link, and you can buy Mia's books from Bank Square Books. But this has been wonderful, Mia. And there's so much I'm looking forward to, and from hearing from you in the future, and going back in your backlist, because I discovered you with The Worst Best Man, but now I've discovered that you have like all these books before then. So I'm going to totally catch up this weekend.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. And for everybody who's here, thank you for listening, and for asking questions. I don't know what the chat was like, but I know I had a lot of fun kind of just sharing a little bit about myself and about my journey.
Well, it's been fascinating. So have a wonderful night to you, Mia, and to everybody who's been here. This has been really great.
Wonderful. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.